welcome back to the Truth to Power podcast. I'm your host, Danger K. Votos, and with me, as usual, is the Executive Director and Attorney for New Energy Economy, Mariel Nanasi. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
It's an exciting time at New Energy Economy right now. We have the legislative session going on. There's a lot of really positive bills that we're supporting. Not so much to oppose, but I think it would be a good idea on this podcast to talk about a really big bill that we want people to oppose. Last year's State of the State address, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham introduced this idea of the strategic water supply. This year, she's kind of got her hands officially off of it, but it seems like it's still the same kind of a deal, right? Strategic water supply. This is essentially a bailout of fracking waste. Last year they asked for $500 million. This year they're asking for $75 million every year to have the public pay for this cleanup of this fracking waste, which is radioactive, toxic, so salty you would expect the Romans to sow it into the earth on Carthage to make sure nothing grows there again. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with the strategic water supply, what this is, and what's going on with this piece of legislation.
So it was amended. So first of all, yes, the governor originally asked for $500 million for the strategic water supply, then $250. Now it's down to $75 million, and now the amended bill, twice amended bill, is saying that the $75 million will be only in perpetuity after the Water Quality Control Commission develops rules. But the question there is, why would the legislature approve $75 million of our money every year in perpetuity for a program that they have not even seen yet? Like, we haven't seen what the Water Quality Control Commission is going to do. Wouldn't they want to see that before they approve that? That seems kind of backwards.
Yeah, let's see the rules first, maybe.
Yeah, let's see the rules first. Like, and also what's backwards is they're supposed to set the guidelines. Like, they're supposed to set the guidelines for the rules so that the rulemaking the rules can be made, the standards can be set based on the law that the legislature sets forth. Mm-hmm. But the overall problems are still in place, and that is that the state of scientific research does not currently support any use of produced water off the oil field. On the oil field is a different story. They can recycle it, they are recycling it, and they're reusing it for further fracking.
For more fracking, right?
And the idea there was to reduce freshwater usage, and there has been some of that. I will just say that. But this is not about on-off field use. This is about off the oil field. And so the most recent scientific studies show that substantially more data is needed, and no uses have been determined to be protective of health, safety, and the environment. And the current rule that this governor has proposed in front of the Water Quality Control Commission allows fracking waste reuse after it's treated to, quote, an appropriate standard. Well, that's no standard at all. What's that mean?
Right. Yeah, it's very subjective. Like, what does that mean? There's no science to back it up, so how could you possibly have rules based on science?
Exactly. And also, where she's talking about using it is really scary. She's talking about using it for potable water, environmental restoration, aquifer recharge. This is what's crazy, for using it as a fire suppressant in wildfires. Yeah. Now, the new Strategic Water Supply Act, which is, by the way, HB 137, does limit the uses a little bit. It says it can't be used for drinking water or agriculture or water for livestock. But otherwise, it's all open. It's all open for industry. It's all open for compact compliance to Texas, and it's open to, as she specifically said, it's open to as a fire suppressant for wildfires. Well, guess what? That water eventually goes down to the Rio Grande or some other,
right,
aquifer.
Fire suppressant. If you're looking at a fire retardant, you're throwing it all over the forest and bosque. And one of the major problems with this produced water, quote unquote, which is what they're calling it, other places call it other things, but it's radioactive toxic fracking waste. One of the problems is that it's radioactive because it has naturally occurring radioactive materials in it, or norms from deep in that bedrock. Who knows if you can clean that out? It's got PFAS in it, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. A lot of people have heard of this as forever chemicals. So if you say, well, it's not for drinking water, it's not supposed to get in your body, but we're spraying it on the forest, you got another thing coming as far as PFAS, though. They get everywhere. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And the results of scientific research for radioactivity levels show that there's radium that has an average of 195 picocuries per liter, which is higher than the EPA regulatory limit of 5 for drinking water. So that's a huge spread. And it also contains exactly what you said, enormous amounts of salt. They say the Permian Basin produced water fracking waste is 6 times saltier than seawater, and has volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds, petroleum, hydrocarbons, organic acids, and oils, and as you said, norm, plus all the chemical fracking additives that they I think there's like 1,000 or 1,400 chemical fracking additives that are in this wastewater as well.
You think because we don't know, because a lot of them are proprietary knowledge, industry secrets that we don't know what's in it, right?
Right. We're trying to get that to be divulged in another proceeding before a rulemaking. But basically, the evidence from people under oath, and this is what's interesting, in a regulatory hearing or in a court of law, people of course have to swear to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And when they do, then the evidence is quite different than when lobbyists for NMOGA get up and give public comment in the legislature. And there's sometimes a big schism between those two. So like we have evidence from the Water Quality Control Commission that said, quote, there are no existing technologies available right now commercially that will treat these huge volumes of produced water. Now that's a quote from a NMOGA witnesses,
Wow.
But you get up and you hear NMOGA's lobbyists at the legislature and they say, we want to treat this, baby. There's a market out there, and don't we want to have economic development?
Yeah.
And it's just, but just to your point before, I'm going to quote from a recent scientific article. Again, a big difference between science and people who have to acknowledge that they are under the protocols of scientific integrity, or in a court of law where they have to testify under oath, and then what's being said at the legislature. So in this one scientific report on Permian Basin produced water, it says, to properly assess risk, we need to have an a priori understanding of the ecotoxicity effects of produced water to different organisms. That is necessary. The word they use is necessary for both risk management and in helping to define the most toxic components and necessary treatment strategies prior to produced water discharge and reuse. And basically they're saying, that's it, right? In order to manage risk. We got to know what's in it. Mm-hmm. And so we're demanding full disclosure. And until we get that, how can we know how to set treatment standards, etc.?
Yeah, what kind of plants would these be? What kind of machines would they require? How much power would they need? Can you get that salt out? What do you do with the salt when you get it out? Can you get the lithium and the radium out? What do you do with the lithium and the radium when you get it out? What do you do with the PFAS? Do you just have a lump of PFAS whenever you're done treating it? What do you do with that?
I think that is an enormous hole in the whole discussion. This is critical. So even their testimony, when they've done some treatment in research laboratories, they have whatever the amount of volume is. And what their own testimony is, at best, they can treat half of the amount of volume. Sometimes only 10 or 20%, which leaves somewhere between 90 and 50% left of what's called residual hazardous waste. No discussion in the Water Quality Control Commission or at the legislature about how to deal with, how to address the residual waste that you just were talking about. Mm-hmm. And the problem with it is it's highly concentrated, right? Because it's not even diluted by the, quote, water, unquote, that's in it, right? It's not even diluted by the fluid that's in it. What you have is this very highly concentrated toxic residual waste, and there's no guidance on how, whatsoever, on how to address this residual waste. Is it going to go to a hazardous waste dump near you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Will it sit there? I know that there are examples of other states that have allowed degrees of produced water reuse. We hosted in Albuquerque this amazing author Justin Nobel, who has this fantastic book, Petroleum, remember the number?
238.
238. Petroleum 238. If anyone's interested in this subject, definitely read Petroleum 238. It's jaw-dropping. And some of his findings include information about other facilities laying dormant. There's news articles about workers being seriously injured by the chemicals from working in these treatment plants. And you get the feeling from reading these stories that the people who are allowing it to happen also don't know what's in it, don't know what to do with it, have no solution for the residual hazardous waste. Justin Noble is talking about abandoned facilities with just pools of radioactive water hanging around. So if we put the cart before the horse on this, like other places have, we're going to have a serious problem on our hands. And we don't have water to spare.
Yeah.
That's a big issue.
I mean, and what you're talking about is not just one or two or three examples, but many, many examples in Pennsylvania, in Wyoming, in West Virginia, that are now toxic waste sites. Abandoned. Right. There's one story in particular from Eureka Resources in Pennsylvania, and they were like on the stock market, and like you just can't make this stuff up. And Eureka Resources was, like on the way up, until it wasn't, and there was an explosion, and somebody died. One of the workers died, and a number, I think 5 or more, workers were seriously injured. And as you say, there's just pools of radioactive toxic waste in the facility, but also around the facility. And now it's a Superfund site. And so it went from, it was good, a big press release and hoopla about how great they were going to be to bring jobs and go on the stock market. And then nothing, right? Except for what we inherit, which is this, white elephant of contamination. And this is what's happened over and over and over again. We see it in West Virginia, as I said, in Wyoming. And it's like, hey, shouldn't we learn from what's happened in those places and not make the same mistakes again? And if you don't mind, I'd like to read part of a letter that at the time, former Speaker of the House Brian Egoff wrote, and he was the sponsor of the Produced Water Act, and he explained in correspondence to the Oil Conservation Commission, and it says, I urge you to take care in crafting regulations to ensure that none of the rules and regulations adopted pursuant to House Bill 546, which was the Produced Water Act, inadvertently allow or report to permit any use, application, or discharge of produced water outside of oil and gas operations. The people of New Mexico will be best served by the adoption of stringent regulations of produced water that put public health and safety first and clearly state that any use of produced water outside of oil and gas operations is prohibited. And so Speaker Egoff concluded his correspondence writing back in 2020, quote, currently several universities are conducting research into the reuse of produced water and whether uses of produced water present health and safety risks to the public and our natural resources. The New Mexico Environment Department and the Water Quality Control Commission will be the agencies best equipped to evaluate any such research when it is complete. At this time, I am unaware of any safe, fully researched application for produced water outside of the oil and gas operations. And since 2020, when Speaker Egoff wrote those words, the science has become clear on only one thing. Permian Basin produced water contains radioactive nuclides, forever chemicals, heavy metals, and a litany of carcinogenic compounds, as well as hundreds of unidentified chemical constituents. The research has not demonstrated the safety of reuse of produced water. The science has simply shown us how much more science we have to do before the use of produced water can be contemplated. That's the state of the situation. But politicians who are well endowed with heavy campaign contributions from this industry, from the oil and gas industry, have knocked on the door of Governor Lujan Grisham and, some of the other Democrats to promote this crazy idea of reuse. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because their current disposal mechanisms are causing earthquakes and they're causing blowouts. And I don't know if people know what a blowout is. I didn't know what it was till recently. But what it is, this produced water is put down injected back into the ground at extraordinarily high pressure. And in order to alleviate the high pressure, it is the produced water is trying to find an outlet, essentially. And so what it has found in a number of situations is that there's abandoned wells that have either were not properly plugged in the first place or have corroded since that early plugging. And the produced water erupts from the abandoned wells. And in one instance, just 3 months ago in Texas, but it's only 36 miles away from New Mexico. And of course, we know that there are really no borders. And this erupted 100-foot geyser. For 19 days, they couldn't control it. And it was just produced water shooting up into the air. And all the hydrocarbons that we were talking about, and the norm and everything, the organic and inorganic volatile compounds were shooting up. And they couldn't stop it. So ranches that were previously, quote, property value have turned in an instant into a Superfund site. Worthless. Less than worthless. And what happens with this land? It becomes not only worthless to one owner or two owners or five owners, but what happens is that the county's tax base, nobody wants to move to a place where there's Superfund sites around them. Nobody wants to do that. And so the county's tax base is lowered.
Yeah.
And literally the whole county has been impacted, let alone the groundwater and, surface water. So it's, this is a real troubling situation.
It's a huge problem too. I challenge anyone, encourage anyone who's listening who has TikTok or an Instagram to look up zombie wells. You'll see dozens, if not more, videos of. There's one channel on TikTok in particular called Zombie Wells. This woman runs around the Permian Basin with a radio, with those Geiger counters, and just monitors and documents these blowouts. And sometimes they gurgle and spread and spew all over the surface, and sometimes, like I said, they shoot up in the air like a geyser. Unstoppable polluting force.
So this is really scary. And, even the Republicans that, want produced water reuse, and one Republican, Larry Scott, acknowledged during a hearing that he said, and there's a quote from him, at least in the southeast part of the state, and he was referring to the Permian Basin, quote, there's way too much salt in that wastewater to even consider the economics of getting that cleaned up. So here we have people who are in the oil and gas business, as he is, acknowledging that the economics don't make sense of produced water reuse.
And that's just for the salt. Doesn't even include the radium and the PFAS and all the other things. He's just talking about the salt alone.
That's correct.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, I think a lot of people, because it has a lot of support among Democrats, that I think the bill sponsors are. Is that correct?
Well, it's interesting because Susan Herrera, who's the bill sponsor, is very clear that this is the governor's bill. Not her bill. Not her bill. And what's interesting is that she talks about, when she introduced the bill to its first committee, she talks about climate disruption and how we have so little snowpack, and then obviously so little resulting water, because we are so dependent for our drinking water on snowpack in New Mexico. But she didn't talk about the bill. She just talked about climate. And, as all environmental groups are, New Energy Economy is concerned about there being sufficient water resources in the future and water quality. But this proposed rule in the Water Quality Control Commission and the law, HB 137, the Strategic Water Supply, and also there's a very similar bill, HB 311, being brought by no other than Nathan Small, is not the answer. These are not the answers. The need for good, clean water means we must trust science and protect our existing water supplies from unknown proprietary chemicals that the oil and gas industry refuses to identify. Regulations and laws involve risk management, and they require balancing. Regulators and lawmakers must weigh the risk of the enormous, irreparable harm posed by use of or reuse of produced water outside the oil fields. Not only is there no evidence that produced water can be safely used, the evidence shows that it can't be.
Wow. And to be clear, we do want this water that the fracking industry is converting into toxic sludge. Like, yeah, we would like to have our water back, but not without the science. We want to see the science first, because I think one thing is strategic water supply seems like a wolf in sheep's clothing, because it's kind of dressed up as a water conservation issue. But even if it was enacted and it, pie in the sky, there wasn't a single leak of any of these horrible compounds in our water, it wouldn't return a drop in the pail of the water that we will lose through climate change over the next 50 years, and so it's not really a water conservation issue. It's really a bailout for the industry who doesn't want to have to pay for or deal with the oceans of toxic fracking waste that they're just piling up in their backyard. I guess they can't inject it in the ground with the veracity that they used to because of the earthquakes and other issues. So this is not a water conservation issue. This is a bailout for waste, for toxic waste. I do want to make sure that people who are listening know how to help us oppose the strategic water supply. We do have a petition. If you could visit newenergyeconomy.org. You could visit any of our social media. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. You're going to find our link tree. You're going to find some links. There's a petition there. And you can also help support or oppose several other House and Senate bills that and find some analysis on those there. I would love to, unless there's anything else you'd like to say about strategic water supply, I'd love to pivot to a positive bill. Something that is pretty exciting that we'd like to get behind. It's not all about stopping things. Sometimes you want to uplift. And that's going to be called the Public Expression Protection Act. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's HB 169 being brought by Andrea Romero and Eleanor Chavez and Senator Pope. And, I was just thinking about, why does the Public Expression Protection Act matter? And before I tell you all about it, what I want to say is, this podcast, what if Chevron didn't like it? And they said, hey, you know what? We're going to sue Mariel Nanasi and Danger Vados and
into oblivion
and New Energy Economy. And we're going to just tie you up, entangle you in a lawsuit and say, you defamed us. You defamed us by talking about the strategic water supply, because we're really good and we would never consider poisoning the earth and blah, 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 whatever. And you defamed us and you cost us money, and we're going to just tie you up in court. And what if they did that not to win? Not to win. Think about that. But as a strategic move to suck us dry of our funds and also of our time, to keep us focused on their lawsuit instead of on the good work that we're doing. That's what the Public Expression Protection Act is all about, is to say that someone who puts out content that is critical of a corporation, for instance, whether that's in a town hall or a public meeting or in written form or in this great podcast or in a publication or social media or whatever, they are protected. That's what HB 169 and the Public Expression Protection Act, say that 20 times fast, protects against. And we have in New Mexico a version of this already on the books, but it only relates to First Amendment content that is made in the context of a quasi-judicial proceeding.
Okay. And
so if some of you recall, there was a person who, during the Avangrid, P&M Avangrid buyout case, was critical of the case and spoke out against Avangrid because he had done some business with Avangrid elsewhere. And he gave public comment during a New Mexico Public Regulation Commission hearing, And he said, based on his personal experience, that he questioned whether Avangrid would be a benefit for New Mexico, and actually spoke out against them being allowed to merge. I don't know if people know, but Avangrid sued him for defamation. But he was exonerated by the New Mexico District Court, and again on appeal as recently as December 2024, and his attorneys were awarded attorney's fees. So that's a great concrete example of the law and it protecting free speech, but again, only in the context of a quasi-judicial proceeding. And basically what this law does, HB 169, is it says, you know what? We need protection of our fundamental right of free speech under the New Mexico and U.S. Constitution in every context. And that's what's important. And that's what we need, because corporations have gone after journalists and environmental advocates and even people who've criticized their pet service
right.
on Yelp. And so that's what this law would protect. And we believe it's critical, especially in these times, to protect free speech, matters of public concern that people make.
Right. I mean, the expression goes that the pen is mightier than the sword, and the context being that industry, especially the fossil fuel industry, has nearly unlimited resources, endlessly deep pockets to spend on ads and attack people and do their will, which is their right. But it has to go. It can't go so far as to silencing people. If the pen is mightier than the sword, our only weapon in our arsenal against these unending resources of theirs is to speak out and to criticize and to expose. And if we are sued for speaking out, criticizing, and exposing, that's kind of the end game for us. So, the Public Expression Protection Act is actually essential legislation for New Mexico, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's like, why is this legislation critical now? Because over the last few decades, we have seen an increase of lawsuits used to intimidate and silence the public, just like what you're just saying. Mm-hmm. The law provides a mechanism. This law would provide a mechanism for the swift dismissal of such cases without the burden of costly and lengthy litigation. And so just the mechanics for any of you wonkies out there is if you were sued, you could file what's called a motion to dismiss, and the judge must make a determination within 60 days. And if the judge, she or he, finds that the impetus for the lawsuit was to silence the public or silence you or silence your critique, then you can win attorney's fees. And as soon as you file your motion to dismiss, discovery is stopped. So they can't entangle you in that web of legal shenanigans. And those are very important protections that are included in this law. And by the way, if after the motion to dismiss and attorney's fees are awarded, and the other side appeals or you appeal, those attorney's fees are held in abeyance, but can be collected if it's upheld on appeal. So I asked again, just like you did in the last part of this, that people go to our website or on our Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and you follow HB 169, the Public Expression Protection Act. We won in front of our first committee. We're awaiting a hearing in House Judiciary, and then if we are so fortunate that it passes there, and then on the floor of the House, it will go to Public Affairs, Senate Public Affairs, and then Senate Judiciary. So we think that there is a possibility that we could win with your support.
Excellent. So again, you can visit linktree/New Energy Economy, or you can visit newenergyeconomy.org to follow up on these bills. And we can't do it without our listeners. We can't do it without the local environmentally conscious. We can't do it without the water protectors in New Mexico. So we are begging you to please jump on board with us. And again, there's a lot of other analysis of other bills to oppose and support on our website and on our link tree. And so I encourage you all to visit that. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain all this. I know it's pretty wonky, dense material, but I think we picked a couple of good ones to talk about opposing and supporting. And thank you, as always, for being an excellent guest on the podcast.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next time.
How long?